Hello, I'm Mantastic and Fantastic, and today I'm going to be talking about the skill inheritance changes that are coming with the patch in late January. So, the skill inheritance system has been renamed to Assist System. They basically the same thing, just a different name for it, so don't get too confused. But as a bit of a background, skill inheritance was released in May of 2016, and it was one of the most game-breaking changes to come to Puzzle & Dragons, because it allowed you to transfer an active skill from one card to another in order to better customize your team, as well as being able to utilize active skills from cards that would not normally be synergistic with your team as a whole. So this is a very powerful mechanic because it allows for more customization, allows you to actually tackle much harder content than you normally would be able to at the same time, as well as having some other interesting advanced strategies, which I will discuss further on in this article. So you can read along if you wish. It'll be linked. This content here will be linked in the YouTube description down below. But I'm going to be covering all the changes that happen to the assist system, but not focusing on the other patch changes. That will happen in a subsequent posting, so stay tuned for that. Now, in essence, what does skill inheritance do? So basically, skill inheritance, or a skill assist, allows you to transfer one skill from one card to another. So the card that is transferring their skill off or donating their active skill is often referred to as the assistant, whereas the card receiving said skill is the base. So you have the base that gains the assistant's skill. Now, in the vast majority of situations, the assistant has to be at least a 5-star or greater card from the rare machine or a collaboration rare machine, with the exception of a couple of farmable monsters which will be released at some point in the future. But regardless, you have to be able to have that monster max awakened via Tamadras and max evolution. Then you can transfer their skill to your base of your choice. Now, this assistant does not actually have to be max level anymore, but there are incentives for max level, which I'll explain further down. So, in essence, the whole assist system allows you to basically customize your team and utilize actives that are not normally feasible that you could not bring from subs. So for instance, if you're say running a mono dark team and you really like Mei Mei's board changer because it combos beautifully with your Pandora, you would not run Mei Mei on your team. However, you would put Mei Mei's active skill on top of some other card in order to gain access to that active skill. So that way you have Mei Mei's active skill, but you do not basically have to sacrifice an entire team slot to run a card that has non-synergistic awakenings as well as colors. So this entire transfer process is 100% reversible, and you only lose the 1 million coins that you invested into it. That will not be refunded. However, when the assistant is transferring their skill, they cannot be used on any other team, nor can they be vendored. However, that assistant monster can still be interacted with via power-up fusion in order to, say, skill them up further or level them up further if that is of interest to you. So, to sum it up, the assistant cannot be used anymore. It transfers their skill away. They just sit in your monster box and cannot be interacted with outside of power-up fusion. Now, this chart will hopefully help you visualize skill inheritance. So, let's say we have Reincarnated Venus as our base and Saria as the assistant. And assuming both are max skilled. So Venus has a 4-turn cooldown, while Saria has a 10-turn cooldown. So this is a way to visualize it. So from turns 1 to 3, there's no active skill, of course. But on turn 4, you have Venus. And moving forward, you have Venus all the way through to turn 13. Like, this is a sliding scale, so your haste will make you go up. So say you're 8 in haste, you go to 9. If you got delayed by 2, this 9 goes to 7. That's the sort of it. It's like the sliding scale. It goes up and down. And let's say from turns 4 to 13, it's only Venus. However, once you hit turn 14 and thus beyond, the skill actually transitions over to Saria's, and it will remain Saria's active skill until you use an active, or basically use that active skill, or you get delayed and it goes back down. But the point being is, once you have Saria's skill active, you can't actually use Venus, so you no longer can use your base monster's active skill once it's been fully charged up to the second skill. So naturally you want to make sure your assistant monster is an intelligent active that you want to use, so you don't run the risk of overriding your base skill. But it's a way to, this chart is basically to help you visualize how your active skills charge up. So remember, haste moves it up, skill delays move it backwards. Now, whenever you use an active skill, say some point in the middle, let's say you use the active skill on turn 10, you use Venus. That means you reset everything back to 0. Basically, an active skill used at any time resets this whole cycle back to 0 and you have to restart the process once again. So overall, this is a very intelligent inherit because Reincarnate Venus has superior stats and awakenings compared to Saria, and basically all you're sacrificing is 1 million coins as well as an extra 4 turns of cooldown to take advantage of a much superior base card's body and awakenings. So these are the changes that have been made to skill inheritance that came with this subsequent patch. So there's the removal of Tans. Now, Puzzle & Dragons is quite a grind-oriented game by nature. There's a lot of repetition involved, and you obviously want to try and maximize your efficiency by playing through it quicker. However, there is, I guess, fun grinding and boring grinding. And acquiring Tans, I'd say, is one of the more boring aspects because it can be a frustrating experience. You have to get the right colors and the right combinations, and it's basically a largely stamina sink overall because you are a lot of times breaking those inherits. So it's not a permanent addition. Like, whereas you get, say, plus eggs and tomatoes, those are permanent. You're always going to have those, so it doesn't feel as wasteful by comparison. But Tans always felt wasteful, to be fair. So by removing the need for Tans and skill inheritance, this not only reduces the boring grind, but also opens up the opportunity to have more stamina to play elsewhere, as well as being able to break inherits with ease. You can transfer a skill to team A, B, and C, as well as go to D if you really needed to. Like, the same active skill can bounce around, provided you actually have the coins to do so. And this will basically allow players to try out more interesting teams. They will be more motivated to try more niche or exciting lineups, just because now you can inherit things on a whim. So don't vendor your Tans. Those Tans actually have a purpose through the new King Tan system, and they will act as pseudo-pies. And again, I will explain that in a subsequent article, so just look forward to that, but don't sell your Tans. So the assistant system will look like this now. So if Dark Kali is the base and Alirane is the assistant, you will be transferring it over for 1 million coins. Dark Kali will be gaining some stat bonuses as well as a new active skill. So Dark Kali has her base board change skill from turns 7 to 13, and then 14 turns and onward, it's going to be the Bind Clear. This is not necessarily the most intelligent usage of these cards, but it's the example we are given. In addition to the changes to the Tans being removed, we also have this new stat bonus transfer. Now, the stat bonus transfer only occurs when you are transferring a skill from an assistant to a base that has the same primary attribute. So in this case, the dark to dark will result in a transition of stats. Now, the transition of stats are based on the assistant card's base stats, and it's 10% of their health, 10% of their health, 5% of their attack, and 15% of their recovery. So in the above example, the Dark Kali actually gains 282 health, 51 attack, and 108 recovery. So these are actually quite significant. Stats being transferred over. Like, we're gaining like a pretty modest amount of stats, and the big deal about this is it allows you to basically improve your team that's already been max 297, because once you've fed 297 pluses, you can't actually improve their stats any further. And with this here, you're actually going to be gaining additional stats. So let's say Alirane is probably about an average weighted stat monster. So you're going to be gaining, say, like just 300 health across the board. So 3 times 6 is 1800 health. If your team had health multipliers, that's multiplied even further. Like, that's quite a large gain, as well as recovery and attack. So you can be creative with your inherits, and I'm going to explain that in my advanced strategy section right here. So not only is skill inheritance used to basically bring new active skills onto your team, but you can be very creative what you do to help further your chances of success by utilizing these advanced strategies. So the first one I want to discuss is upgrading an existing active skill. So a lot of popular cards, like whether they're subs or leaders, do have reasonable active skills. However, oftentimes there is a better option available somewhere out there. And that better option with that active skill may not necessarily have the desired typing, stats, or awakening. So you won't necessarily want them on the team, but you want that active skill. So what you can do is simply upgrade actives. So from these 3 examples, there's the Light Canna, who can inherit Facet. And Light Canna has one of the best bodies in the game. She's got 4 TPAs, high weighted stats, whereas Facet has relatively lackluster awakenings and weighted stats. So by transferring Facet's skill onto Canna, you are directly upgrading a burst damage style active, because Canna boosts damage to gods and dragons, whereas Facet boosts damage to the whole team based on the number of TPA awakenings. So this is a direct upgrade of Canna's skill, which is most likely going to be the case for a lot of players, because this direct upgrade is beneficial, as well as providing a buffer for skill delays, which I'll explain further down. In addition, Dark Kali can inherit Ichigo or Lightning, and both of those cards will allow you to have a stronger board changer, as well as the stat transfer from Ichigo. That should be the updated icon. I'm not sure why that didn't occur. But the point being is you're able to upgrade Dark Kali's board changer with something that gives a board changer and some other collateral benefit. And finally, you can upgrade a shield. So I'm going to use Dark Izanami as an example because she's quite a strong shielding option for dark cards, and she is farmable, and farmable cards can act as the bases. So if you're, say, using Dark Izanami in your team, you can inherit an Indra or a Susanoo onto her in order to upgrade her 35% damage reduction shield. So even if you don't actually necessarily use the upgraded active component, you still have your base active, which was useful, but the idea is you at least have a chance to use something that is stronger if you wait a little longer. In addition, you can make a hard bind clearer. Now, generally speaking, a lot of bind clearing cards lack offensive awakenings, or they may not necessarily have the best stats, or they just may not be ideal for the most part. So what a lot of players have been doing is choosing a bind immune card and inheriting a bind clear active on top of it. So, for example, Awoken Sao Sao is one of the stronger mono fire subs and leaders, and a lot of people like to use them on their teams. However, you can utilize that bind immunity to actually bring a bind clear, so you don't have to run direct bind clearing cards. So for example, you can inherit Amino Uzume's active skill onto Awoken Sao Sao. This will not only transfer some stats because it's fire to fire, but provide you with a 4-turn bind clear on a card that is bind immune with better awakenings. In addition, after you've used that bind clear, you still have Awoken Sao Sao's base active skill to use. So that means you actually have the option to use an offensive active skill when you've already fulfilled the bind clearing requirements. And that's important because if, say, you brought a direct bind clearing sub as is, you only have that bind clearing active. Use the bind clear, say, in the middle of the dungeon, it charges up again, but now you have an active that's a bind clear but has no use on the boss. Whereas if you used a bind immune card with an orb changer, let's say, you at least have the opportunity to use another offensive orb changer after the bind clear has been fulfilled. So it's an interesting way to add more utility on your team without sacrificing offensive capabilities. And in addition to all those, you can also boost base monster stats. Now, your priority should always be making sure you have the correct active skill. Like, don't inherit things for the sake of base stats if you're going to run the risk of charging up the incorrect active. You want to obviously prioritize active skills first, but if you are able to do so in a comfortable manner, you should be selective about trying to choose cards that have the same primary attribute in order to benefit from these base stats. Like from the above example, let's say every card gained 300 health. That's 1800 health across the entire team. That's quite a significant boost in power. That is 100. That's a lot of plus eggs, let's put it that way. So it may not be obviously easy to do because a lot of times you may want to say inherit an off-color board changer, but again, you should still prioritize gaining the best active skill possible and only doing the boosting of the base stats if it is convenient. Now, this is quite a large concept here, but it's skill delay protection through skill inheritance or assistance system. Now, even though we have the access to skill delay resistant Tamadras as well as the chance to farm them from Special Descend Rush, not everyone can do so feasibly. It's a challenging dungeon, requires a complicated setup if you want to button it, and it may not be necessarily appropriate for everyone. However, we can still benefit from skill delay protection with intelligent inheritance because it, like I showed you at the top, it acts as a sliding scale, if you may. So there is a window of buffer. Like, let's say Venus had the Dream base active skill and you've charged up to 10. When you get delayed, you go back to 7. You still have Venus's active skill. And there's several ways to do this. So the first and perhaps most straightforward way to do so is using the exact same monster as a duplicate and inheriting them. Now, inheriting the exact same monster will guarantee that no matter what part of that sliding scale you were on, you are going to have the same active skill ready. So let's say you hit to 10 turns in this example, you have Flawless Devotion. If you're at 20 turns, you still have Flawless Devotion. It does not matter where you are, provided you've at least charged up one skill. You always have Flawless Devotion's active skill ready. So you never have to worry, there's no stress involved. In addition, providing a duplicate monster like this guarantees your stat transfer because it's the same monster, it has the same base primary color. So now you gained additional stats, you have wonderful skill delay protection. However, one thing you have to realize is that this type of skill delay protection, regardless of what you use for inheritance, only works if the seconds you're charging up partially in. So let's say you are at exactly 4 turns from this sliding scale here. If you get delayed by 2, it does no protection because you're going back to 2, and then at 2 there's no active skill. Whereas if, say, you're at 6 and got delayed by 2, you're still at 4, so you can still use the base active skill. So the idea is you're protecting the base active skill, but it has to be charged up partially in order to have that skill delay protection. That's one thing you have to keep in mind. So it's not 100% foolproof like the latent Tamadras. Another strategy is inheriting an excessively long random skill. Now, that name may not necessarily be the tidiest, but the idea is you inherit an active skill that has an incredibly long cooldown just for the sake of skill delay protection. The idea is that the dungeon is either short enough or you're planning to use the base active skill often enough to never let that inherited skill ever charge up. And if, say, the active skill is Dark Hades, which is a 30-turn cooldown, it's going to be very hard to have the base skill get charged and then 30 turns on top of that. And unless you're playing an excessively long dungeon or you have an outrageous amount of skill boost, you don't run the risk of the excessively long random skill charging up. Now, naturally, when you're using an excessively long random skill, you want to make sure it's the same color attribute in order to benefit from the stat bonuses. But again, if your priority is skill delay protection, just inherit the longest skill you possibly can and enjoy that big buffered window. So again, from that example with the sliding scale, say we had Venus who have a Hades inherit, just to make it simple, for 30 turns. So from 4 to 33 turns, it's always Venus. And then at 34 turns and beyond, it becomes Hades. So it's a wonderful way to add protection. In addition, one thing that has come out very recently is taking advantage of Ras. And Ras is a farmable descend monster who can be inherited. And they have an active skill that ranges from 21 to 6 turns based on how many skill ups you've acquired. And if you leave it at the 21 turns, it's quite a long skill, and you're not necessarily going to have it charged up in most scenarios. So it's a great way to acquire basically a random monster and a random skill to act as a long buffer to skill delays. In addition, if you're using it for, say, mono wood teams like, say, Zeus Dios on Liu Bei teams, you can throw the Ras onto all the Zeus Dioses, and you have the 15 plus the 21, so you have 36 turns before it transitions out of Zeus Dios. No team has that many skill boosts, so you should be relatively safe, in all honesty, from it transitioning over to the wrong active skill. So it's just one thing to keep in mind is finding these long active skills to act as these nice large buffers. So, in conclusion, it may take some time for people to transition over to calling it assist system. I found assist system doesn't sound as nice as compared to skill inheritance, but it will happen probably one day. I'll start saying that naturally. But overall, these changes have been quite wonderful. The removal of tans allows us to utilize inherits more liberally. We can change them up at will. We can use more niche and exciting teams, and just reducing the boring grind aspect of Puzzle & Dragons. Furthermore, the stat bonuses are great for improving those endgame teams where you're trying to min-max as much as possible, along with providing a little bit more incentive for inheriting those same primary colors, as well as being creative with what active skills you choose to inherit. So, which part of this new whole system are you most excited about? Let me know in the comments below, and I hope you have a mantastic day, and happy puzzling!